this, concerns about this mine have been going on for really 10, 15 years. And people have been trying to get, data from the company and from the DEC to sort of build their case. But the DEC has sort of gone along with Cargill's pleas to not release a lot of the information on the actual geology of the of the rock underneath the lake. So anyway, I started following it probably 4 or 5 years ago when I talked to people over in Ithaca who were very concerned and frustrated about it.
So give us the rundown here. What would you consider to be the meat and potatoes of this story, or the most important part of it?
Yeah, and I would say, first of all, I think this may be the most important environmental story in the Finger Lakes going on right now. There are some big ones with sludge and HABs and Greenidge and everything else, but I would put this number one. And I think that the looming danger is a mine flood of underneath Cayuga Lake, and this is more than a remote possibility. One international mining expert who has made detailed studies of mine failures worldwide says most active salt mines are lost to flooding. So that's kind of the baseline that we're going with. Now, in Cargill's case, under Cayuga, their seismic studies have come up with these things called anomalies, geologic anomalies, where the bedrock between the lake and the mine is either thin or has faults or is dangerous in some other ways. And the State Department of Environmental Conservation has said, yeah, we acknowledge these are potential danger areas. So we want you to steer clear of mining near these. So avoid them, even have some setbacks away from them. But the company has already mined under several of these areas that were once depicted as risky anomalies. So, but the history of salt mines is also really, really important to understand. In 1994, the Retzoff mine in about 65 miles west of Cayuga, it was the largest salt mine in North America. It completely flooded, and it caused giant sinkholes and cracked highways and bridges, and it ruined water wells, did all these things. Well, 2 years later, the Dutch company that owned Retzoff, that mine, they sold most of their North American salt mining assets to Cargill. And in that 1996 deal, Cargill got one big mine near Cleveland and another one in Louisiana. Now, 2 years ago, that Louisiana mine had a roof collapse, and it trapped 18 miners, and it killed 2 of them. And Cargill promptly gave up on that mine, even though it had for a long time employed about 200 people. And this year, it began intentionally flooding that mine. And the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration cited Cargill with, quote, aggravated conduct constituted more than ordinary negligence. Now, Cargill is currently contesting a $356,000 fine for that fatal accident. And separately, it has confidentially settled 2 wrongful death lawsuits with the miners' widows. But right now, Cargill has clear sailing to legally continue mining under Cayuga Lake. So just a little, well, go ahead. You have a question?
I guess the question that pops into my head first is, most people listening or watching this probably wonder what the difference is between collapse and flooding and which is more common. Did your reporting get into that, or were any of the experts able to kind of decipher the difference for the common man, what the difference is there?
Well, the mining expert, the international mining expert, said that right now the mine is leaking. It has faults, and water is leaking into the mine. And he says right now, everything's okay. Cargill is pumping it and is keeping ahead. But there have been other mines that this guy has cited saying that, yeah, that can go on for a couple of years, but then you have a problem. Then something bigger happens. There was a giant potash mine in Canada that leaked kind of like this for a couple of years, and then it had a big leak, and then it completely flooded. And so that seems to be what the risk is out there. But what's happened is the state environmental law has been totally sidetracked on this. Yeah, in 1975, New York passed this landmark law that basically said that the goal of it was to basically help communities avoid being blindsided by environmental calamities. That was the goal of the law. And that law requires an environmental impact statement whenever there may be a risk of a significant impact on the environment. And that law emphasizes public participation through comments and hearings. But the agency can totally sidestep that law by summarily ruling that a project will not have any significant impact on the environment. This is called a neg dec, or a negative declaration. The neg dec is the holy grail for large corporations seeking permits for dangerous projects. Companies and their lawyers fight for them because they want to avoid the cost and the delay and the public participation of an environmental impact statement. Cargill got its neg dec. So did Greenidge Generation, the Bitcoin operation on Seneca Lake, despite a slew of environmental issues. Yep. The DEC just said, everything's fine. There's no environmental risk here. They just said it, and that short circuits the whole environmental impact process. Well, it turns out that Cargill and Greenidge use the same law firm, Barclay Damon, and its partners include William Barclay, who's the minority leader of the New York State Assembly, and Tom O'Mara, who's the former chair of the state's Senate's Committee on the Environment. Okay, so there have been a couple of lawsuits on this. There's a process in New York in law called the Article 78 petition, and it allows people to file civil lawsuits challenging the legality of a government action, such as granting a permit without an environmental impact statement. Now, there have been two that have been filed, and in both cases, Cargill has won. And I should say Cargill and the DEC have won, because what you have, if you have the lawyers for Cargill and the DEC are on one side, and on the other side are the lawyers for the people who are saying, hey, we want an environmental impact statement. So the DEC and Cargill share these victories in court. So what about the state courts? I mean, they tend to defer to the DEC decisions on whether to issue a neg dec on the grounds that they don't want to second guess the agency's expertise. So judges typically toss out lawsuits that challenge the agency's decision to sidestep, the law's public process. This happened with Greenidge too. But in the Cargill case, dismissal orders often read like they were drafted by the company rather than by the judge. Listen to this in the Cargill case. The judge actually wrote this, quote, "Any anticipated harm is remote and contingent and may be prevented by further administrative action," end quote. Okay, I don't believe any objective individual who has looked at the history of salt mines and Cargill's record of spotty compliance with government regulations would ever write those words, but Cargill would. So anyway, my argument is that when companies use lawyers and lobbyists and campaign contributions to the governor to win negative decks in spite of public outrage, then the law itself is undermined. Right. And that's kind of, that's my argument on all this. And I just think that we're greatly underestimating the risk. And I should say, the DEC is required Cargill to post a $3.5 million bond. And I think that may be short by maybe 100 times, maybe more. If the judge that wrote that this is a remote chance, if that's correct, then if the risks are remote, then it should be easy to find an insurer that would greatly increase that bond, and it should be cheap to pay for it. So I don't see why the DEC doesn't greatly increase the bond. If they're not going to do the environmental impact statement, at least let there be insurance.
What does it say to you? Because obviously you mentioned a slew of environmental stories here in the last 10 minutes that you've covered, that others have covered, that are still very much active, Greenidge being one of them. What does it say to you that now we're really bringing into focus the fact that both Seneca and Cayuga Lakes, two of the two largest Finger Lakes, have pretty significant risk factors associated with them in terms of these environmental kind of clouds that are looming over them?
Well,
is the outlook as bleak as, because I know some people are gonna hear this and probably think to themselves, boy, this is bleak. This sounds really bleak.
Well, all I would say is we need a better understanding of what these risks are. It's true. I'm like maximizing what the risks could be, but that's what an environmental impact statement says. It goes in and it actually documents it, and it says, no, you're overstating that risk. No, you're understating this risk. That's the whole purpose of an environmental impact statement. That was the purpose of the 1975 state law. And when you allow the companies to short circuit that law, then you're sort of in a territory where you don't know what the risks are. You know, I concede. I'm saying, hey, this is really a potential problem. But hey, Retzoff happened. The Louisiana salt mine happened. The collapse there happened. There are other big ones that I cite in the story that happened. This expert who studied them worldwide says they usually flood. Well, what happens if that happens under Cayuga Lake? I mean, we should be asking these questions, and we should be requiring, the DEC and politicians to give us some, better accounting than we're getting from them so far.
What do the experts say as far as that goes? Like, what happens? What happens if salt mines flood under Cayuga Lake or collapse or whatever number of things that could potentially go wrong with a salt mine? Since we do have fairly recent examples of salt mines that have gone wrong, so to speak.
Well, the Louisiana one that had the problem, that seemed to be a relatively localized roof collapse, but it was apparently significant enough that they closed the entire mine that employed 200 people. It was almost as big as the Cayuga mine. But the Retzoff mine is a really good one to look at because it's 65 miles to the west of the Cargill mine here. And it's there's some very similar geological formations. And what happened when Retzoff failed, there were massive sinkholes, there were highways that sank, there were bridges that cracked. It either dried up a lot of private wells, or it ruined them with salinity. So all of these are issues. If we had an environmental impact statement, all those people that live along the lake, Cayuga Lake, they might get some kind of insight as to, well, where are the sinkholes going to happen when this floods? Is the lake going to drop by inches? Is it going to drop by feet? We don't know. We have no way of knowing. Nobody's ever been required to make those kind of projections. And so am I being hysterical by saying, well, maybe it's going to drop by a foot or more, or 3 feet? I don't know. I just want the law to be applied so that we get answers to that. I'm not saying I know the answer. I'm saying the law would allow you to find an answer.
And my last question for you here on this is kind of a two-parter. Part one would be, where does this go next? Do we think the state will do anything? And part two is, Um, how does it feel or seem that this particular issue, Cargill mining, salt mining under Cayuga Lake, has flown a bit under the radar over the last 5, 6, 7 years, despite it being obviously a major, major issue?
Well, a couple of years ago, there were assembly members that held a press conference and said, "We got to stop this. We got to stop the mining under the lake." Well, one of those assembly members is retired. The other one just lost an election battle, so they're gone. Um, that when I said a minute ago that I think Cargill has kind of clear sailing right now legally, they don't really have, as far as we know, any state legislators that are making a big deal out of this. Uh, they've won their 2 court challenges, and I don't know that there's going to be another court challenge. There certainly could be, but there's not one on the horizon right now. So it's a little hard to say. Maybe the next shoe to drop is going to be an accident. I don't know.
Incredible. And then what's the thing you were watching for as you move forward with this particular, would it be the activist side of things to see if anybody engages on it now, or is there something internally within the company that you're watching for?
Well, I'm kind of hoping that there'll be more journalism on this. I mean, I'm a blogger. I do this just pro bono, and I'm the only person that's really addressing it. You know, the New York Times or somebody, or if they ever know, I don't think they've ever even looked at it. And at what point is there somebody calling for accountability beyond a blogger like me? So I don't know.
I think you're selling yourself a little bit short there. The best environmental reporter in the Finger Lakes, it's Peter Mantius. Peter, thanks so much for the time.
Okay, Josh, thanks.